If you've been working to progress with strength, sport, or skill, but your wrists seem to be holding you back, this routine is for you. Follow along with me as I take you through a simple 3-step process that's gonna help you eliminate wrist pain and build a pair of strong wrists. You can use this routine and the process I lay out in this video as a way to build up strength in the wrists, as a warm-up for your workouts, and as a recovery protocol if you run into any wrist tweaks or injuries. Before we get rolling, here are 3 reminders to promote progress and safety as you go throughout this session. Number 1, take your time. This goes for the tempo at which you perform the exercises and the rate at which you progress with your wrist strength. Wrist strength must be built over time, so there's no reason to overdo it or rush things. Number 2, work in your active range. Stay connected to your ranges and your movement. Incremental gains are the focus here, and that's what's gonna keep you safe and healthy for the long term. Number 3, if you experience pain, be sure to decrease the range of motion and decrease the amount of load that you're putting through your wrists. Let's get to work. So let's get a little heat in the body, clapping those hands together, and just simply rubbing the palms and the fingers together. Starting to put a little pressure through those hands. Maybe you're feeling it through the shoulders, the chest, the back. Taking some nice deep breaths. Arms above the head, and we're simply gonna close and open the hands. So close and open, strong in both directions. Really want to spread the fingers, but open, spread them apart from each other. As you go through this, I want you to start to experience not just the tension or the movement in the hands, but start to feel that connection down into the lat and into the back. And maybe you can start to feel some connection through the heart and even into the core. Keep building some heat. This might be fatiguing. Let's pick up the tempo. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead and rest and shaking the hands out. So the first step in that 3-step process is to mobilize the wrists. This is gonna allow us to sense and feel movement in that area of our body. And we're gonna do this with single wrist rolls. I'm gonna grab my wrist like so, and then I'm gonna work through the ranges of motion. So if I turn to the side, you're gonna see I've got flexion, and then I've got extension. So feel free to go through that with me right now. In pinning some of this tissue down, you might feel a little bit more stretch through different areas of your wrist. One of the reasons why I like it. So we've got that flexion and extension. And then we've also got, if I were just right here, we've got this deviation, okay? From there, we're gonna go flex down, make a fist, and we're simply gonna hit circles, okay? So pinning that tissue down, feeling your wrist, this is also going to help you isolate the movement from, let's say, the elbow or the rotation of the forearm, and really focus on that extension, that lateral flexion or deviation, flexion, and then hitting that deviation the other side. Let's go ahead and reverse. Again, slow, getting to know your wrists, sensing and feeling the movement occur in the wrist. So if you need to shake that hand out, maybe both. And let's go ahead and switch over to the other side. So once again, I pin that tissue down, and then from that point, flexion and extension to start, and then getting a feel for that deviation or lateral flexion. You don't have to keep your arm up here if that's uncomfortable. You could bring this down a little bit, but nice and slow, feeling out your range of this movement. Let's go ahead and reverse directions. Hey, I don't have as much range going this particular way, or I'm feeling compensation elsewhere in the body. That's great. This is an awareness exercise, and we're gonna build awareness, get to know our wrists. Shake those hands out. Next, we're gonna take it into wrist figure eights. So we're gonna pin the elbows to the side of the body. Wanna make sure we're not rounding, so extend through the heart. And we're gonna start by going thumbs up, out, and then up, down. So I want to draw a figure 8 motion with my thumb, or you could even think index finger, okay? One of the big mistakes before we switch directions is maybe this through the elbows and the shoulders. So that's why we want to pin those elbows down, keep this movement in the wrist. Now here you can feel as we reverse directions, we're now going to lead with the pinky. So the pinky scoops in and up and then back towards my chest and then down and out, right? So figure 8, moving through there, and you're hitting that flexion, that extension, that deviation, and everything in between. And your wrists might be feeling this pretty good by now. We've been doing it for a while. So let's go ahead and take it into that shake. Next, we're gonna take it into magnetic wrists. So I'm gonna act like I've got a positive and a negative here, and they come together. And then from this point, I don't wanna lose that contact. So I wanna start to create a little bit of force, a little bit of load through my wrists. So let's say I'm moving forward. I'm gonna start to come through, let's say that thumb, and then the back of the hand going in through that flexion. I keep the connection through my wrists or through the backs of my hands. And then once again, I reestablish there. So I'm gonna scoop those hands under, serving something up here. And so I wanna create a little bit of force through there. So now my wrists are starting to respond to load. A little preview. Let's go ahead and reverse direction. So if I have magnetic wrists here, I'm gonna roll, swim. You can see backs of the hands together, swim out. Okay, shake those hands out. The second step of this process is loading through the wrists. So we're gonna get down on the ground. First move we're gonna do to load the wrists is a rock. Bring the hands out underneath our shoulders so we're in that wrist extension. You can either have your toes tucked under or flat on the ground. Eyes are gonna be forward, and we're gonna shift back into the hips, driving through those hands, and then pulling ourselves forward as we drive through the heel of the hand. And now you're gonna see, okay, I can start to go a little bit deeper into some extension through the wrist. Now this is where we wanna be careful and aware of our active range. So no need to force putting more pressure through the hands, and no need to force the amount of range that you're going into. Other thing we wanna focus on as we go through the rock, we are strong through that whole arm line. So as I rock forward, if I start to maybe collapse through my elbow or my shoulder does something like this, we may not be able to load through the wrists. And so there's some compensation happening elsewhere in the body. Continuing to rock like this, I'm gonna give you a couple more progressions. If you can't really get into a deep squat like this, what I'd recommend is getting into what you can with more of a hinge squat or a squinge. So from this position, now I can reach my hips back, plant my hands, start to roll through those hands and those wrists, and then put a little bit more pressure. You can see that extension, knees tap the ground, and then I press back. If you can't get that deep squat, that's what I want you doing. If you do have the deep squat, this is a great movement for you to rock in and out of that. So you can see my heels slightly off the ground. I roll through the foot, I roll through the hands, really drive and create pressure through the heel of the hand, and start to expand that range over my wrists. Staying connected with the movement. And if you've watched some of my primal movement and animal flow videos, this rock is a huge staple in the warm-ups, so I definitely encourage it. We're simply gonna play with different hand positions. So I'm gonna point my fingertips out, and then I'm going to point my fingertips back. And if we rock back on this one, that's gonna intensify the stretch. So really make sure we're connected and driving through this initial range before you start to lean back. And then we're just gonna play with those different angles. We're gonna turn the fingertips in. Again, straight arms to the best of your ability, driving through the ground, creating force through the heel of the hand and the wrist. stay connected through the rest of our body, and we incrementally increase that range over time. This next move is a classic for wrist strengthening. I want you to really focus on the load that makes sense for you though. So if we're right over here and this seems like a lot, it's not feeling good on your wrists, your hands, lean back a little bit or even bring your hands closer, but put more weight through the hips, okay? Press up through that first knuckle. So we're really driving the pad of the hand through the ground. Nice and slow, so we're gonna come through more of a neutral position in the wrist, and then we allow that stretch and recontacting through the ground on the descent. Thumbs can be off the ground as well as you press through. And you can see I'm doing my best to keep connected through my arms. All right, let's rest there. Let's go ahead and shake those wrists out. Might need a little breather. At any point throughout this video, pause it, shake the hands out. With straight arms, draw a circle with pressure through our hand. So I'm gonna bring my hands down underneath me, and I'm gonna start circling through the pad of my hand. If this seems like a lot through your wrists and your hands, rock back a little bit more and then bring your hands a little bit closer. That way you can maintain pressure and load through the ground. Go ahead and reverse directions. Again, doing your best to just feel out those contact points. I can feel my forearms getting tired. I can feel a little compensation through the elbow. So I'm gonna get a couple more and call it. Last exercise of step 2, that loading phase. Take the backs of our hands and drive them through the ground. Adjust accordingly. We can bring those hands tighter to the body, pull back through the hips. And now that's maybe a little less pressure. Just making some fists here. And you might find some limitations through each digit. Again, we want to stay strong through the lines of the arms, so not letting anything collapse. And so I like this position where the fingertips are facing each other here, but where I really get a ton of value is going to be here. So I'm able to really drive through those arms, maybe rotate my elbow pits forward, just kind of doing individual fingers. And then those fists, really like we worked on first thing today, really opening wide and then doing your best to close. Whew. Shake them out, go through some of those wrist mobilizations, and we're gonna take this into our last step, which is integration with movement. You can apply the wrist mobilizations and loading to any sort of movement. Today, we're gonna focus on some basic primal movements, some traveling drills, so you can start to integrate this into your practice. So we're gonna come to all fours. We've got our toes tucked under. Now, something I hear a lot is, man, this is tough on my wrists when I come up off the knees and I start taking it into a crawl. Off of that, I could simply just bring my eyes up, still be strong through my core, and work on loading through the wrist. So I don't need to elevate the knees off the ground to really start to progressively load and integrate that wrist strength into my movement. So let's go ahead and elevate the knees an inch up off the ground, maybe a little bit more. And we're simply going to load with a crawl forward and back. The more we can drive through the heel of the hand, embrace that extension through the wrist, the better we're gonna have more integrated connection through the body. And that's the key. We don't want that energy to get stuck here in the wrist. We wanna feel the connection back to the center of the body. So now our dainty little wrists become part of a chain that is really nice and strong. And relax. You may be feeling some sort of discomfort through your wrists. If it is pain and you make that distinction, rest, back off, and regress the movement. Next up, we got the crab position. And you can totally just hang out in any of these positions and focus on driving through those contact points, establishing some load through the wrists. I find that this can be tough, especially if we turn the fingertips back. So fingertips pointed out here is gonna be better for most people, and then you can gradually start to play with different angles. Driving through those hands, you're already gonna create a good amount of force here, and then lifting that butt up off the ground. Something you can do with that deviation of the wrist is sliding the butt towards your heels and then sliding your butt towards your hands. And we want to develop the ability to load those wrists in all those angles. Maybe do some circles, or you could take it into that travel. Really focused on driving through the hand, through the heel of the hand, and supporting your body by loading through the wrist, not in the wrist, through it. And lastly, my head might get chopped off here, but that's okay. We're gonna go into the monkey. You could be higher up here. We don't need to be super low, but if you have access to that, that's pretty nice. Going a little bit higher is gonna allow you to put a little bit more pressure through the hands, shuffle, shuffle. So I lead cross body, plant the other hand, shuffle my feet, trail foot lands first. If I'm nice and low, same sequence. And this is one where I can be really low, light, or at least lighter on the wrists. And as my wrist strength starts to progress, I can start to be a little bit more hand balancy with these moves. Know that over time, you're gonna have not only the strength, but the endurance to maintain that connection through the ground. So before we get out of here, quick review on this process. Step one, mobilize those wrists in different ways. I didn't go through all the mobilizations today, so know that if you find something that works for you, you can plug it in that step. Step two, load the wrists by progressively putting more weight through the hands and then maybe increasing the range. And lastly, integrate that wrist mobility and strength into some movement. So today we did some primal movement. Now you can do this with anything. So let's say your wrists hurt during push-ups. You could go through some of this mobilization, go through the strength work, and then reassess with how your push-up feels. Use that three-step process and you're gonna be able to build those strong wrists and build them safely and progressively. In terms of frequency, I would focus on mobilizing the wrists every single day. So this is lower impact and something that can lubricate the joint and start to restore movement. In terms of loading, if you are experiencing some sort of pain or discomfort in the wrist, go for 2, maybe 3 times a week in terms of loading. This is gonna give you a nice framework to build up that strength through the wrist. Take it slow, listen to your body, and stick to a frequency that you're gonna be able to maintain long-term. That's all I've got for you in this wrist strength video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the Smooth channel. If you have any further questions, pop them in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you and potentially answer those questions in future videos. Until next time, stay smooth.